Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In the previous one, I covered Madeline Pryor, aka the Goblin Queen, or the native tier 2 character at the end of the latest epic quest. And in this one, I'm going to be taking a look at the other characters in the epic quest, which are Havok, Rachel Summers, and Hope Summers, with the exclusion of Exodus since he's only tier 2 and I can't really test much content with him. And I'm going to be testing these characters because you basically need them to get Madeline Pryor. So if you are going to do that epic quest to get that character, then you're inevitably going to end up building these characters too. So I'm going to show you basically how they perform and give you some tips on how to build them and where they could have the most value in the game currently. The first character that I'm looking at is Hope Summers, which is the character that you get bios for or unlock once you get the deluxe pack for the epic quest and you do some of those missions, and she ended up doing actually decently in World Boss Legend. The very first test I did with her was a stage 29 of Null without leaderships, supports, or a damage proc. And like I mentioned, she is decent. She was able to complete this with almost 40 seconds left, but she isn't at the top end of the female restriction for this stage, as those were able to complete it with almost 60 seconds left. I would highly recommend building this character for PvE if you do end up getting and building her up, since the main value that she brings to your roster will be in ABX, considering that she is meta for the Combat Female Day, as you'll see in the tests that follow. The rotation that I use for the character is to do a 2, delay cancel when you see the animation start, then you do a 5, cancel 3, and delay cancel when you see the animation start again for the third, which is about a half second. Then you finish off with the 4th skill. When you have your awakening skill, you simply use that at the beginning and then do the same rotation of 2, delay cancel 5, cancel 3, delay cancel 4. I was using a mighty CTP of Rage in this particular test, and I was able to shave off about 2 minutes from the clear time, and it is basically the only CTP that I would recommend for her because, again, her main value is going to be in ABX, and that is the best option to use for that particular mode. The next character that I tested was Havok, and I fully expected him to be worse off in PvE content, considering that he was advertised for PvP since he has some of the skill effects to excel in that mode. But after the first test that I did, I noticed that he basically ended up being one of the best, if not the best, character for World Boss Legend from the epic quest. In the initial test that I did with Havok, I'm not using a damage proc, I'm not using his leadership or supports either, and I was able to complete stage 30 of Null, which is a stage higher than I did with Hope, and did that 20 seconds faster than her. If you want to build this character for PvE, which is probably what I would recommend considering how poor his performance in PvP is, then a CTP of Energy is a really solid option. He is very proc friendly and very easy to play, and a CTP of Rage won't really give you too much value on the character since you're likely not going to be using him in things like Giant Boss Raid or things like Alliance Battle Extreme, though you can use that if you wish as well. With that said, I would say that the most ideal option for him would be a CTP of Destruction, since you get the benefits for PvE that you would usually get from a CTP of Energy, and you also get penetration to Invincible added to his kit, which will also help him in PvP. The rotation that I went with the character is to do a quick cancel of the 1st and 2nd skill, and then you do a 3 delay cancel when you see him go up in the air and the animation briefly start on the 3rd skill. Then you immediately go into the 5th skill, cancel that into the 4th skill, which is the one that you want to finish and proc on. Once you have your ultimate skill available, you basically do the same rotation, but you cancel the 4th skill and finish with the ultimate skill instead. You can see that with the Mighty Destruction equipped, I was able to complete this stage 2 minutes faster than before, or basically in about 2 minutes, and was able to also clear it around 50 seconds faster than I did with Hope and her Mighty CTP of Rage. I didn't end up testing Rachel with a damage proc. I only had a Mighty CTP Authority on her, and she did end up performing the worst in World Boss Legend, but not really by as much as I thought. She was only about 4 seconds off in the clear time compared to Hope with the same conditions of no damage proc, no leadership and support on stage 29 of Null. I wouldn't necessarily recommend building this character for PvE. She has more value in PvP, as you'll see soon enough, but if you do want to do that, a CTP of Rage is likely your best option since you do have to delay cancel some skills, and I guess you can make some use out of her in things like ABX on the Universal Female Day. However, it's not going to be nearly as good as Hope's performance because she doesn't have as many hits as Hope does when you go through her skill rotation. Speaking of the skill rotation, the one that I went with is to do a 4 cancel 3. You delay cancel that after she goes up in the air and you see the animation of the fire orb appearing, and then you finish off with the 5th skill. When you have your awakening skill available, you simply use that in the beginning and quick cancel it and go into the same rotation again, which is the 4 cancel 3, delay cancel 5. It's no surprise that Hope is the dominant and clear winner of these characters for ABX. She is meta for the Combat Female Day since she has that rare typing. There aren't many good options for that day. She also has a self-leadership. She has a support through her artifact if you're able to get that. She gains 65% additional attack from her 3rd skill and another from her 5th skill, totaling 130% additional attack, and another 100% additional damage on top of that when you use her 4th skill. Not to mention the fact that she has an insane number of hits since you can cancel so many different skills, including the 2nd, 5th, 3rd, and the awakening skill when you have that up. Not to mention that the character also has all of the cancel effects that you need for the different seasons of ABX, including burn, silence, and paralysis. With that mighty CTP of Rage, 4 physical attack, Urus, and no artifact, on the first test that I did with her, I was able to score 12.5 million. So with a better build and a little bit more practice, I'm pretty sure that I would have been able to score 13 to 13.5 million. So for those people who are really into ABX, I'm pretty sure that they can push 14 million or maybe a little bit more. There isn't really too much to say about Havok in ABX. He does have all of the cancel effects similar to Hope for the different ABX seasons. However, because he has the Blast male typing, he isn't really going to be considered for ABX since there are so many better options, especially ones that can get to tier 4. With that mighty CTP of Destruction and almost missing every proc since it doesn't really work well in this mode, I was able to score around 9.2 million. So if you go with something like a CTP of Rage, you could probably hit 10 million or more with him, which is kind of decent, but again, I wouldn't really recommend it since this isn't really the mode that he excels in and you're not going to get much value out of him here. Rachel seemed to do decent in the universal female typing. I was able to score a little bit over 8 million with her with no damage proc, which is kind of standard for a character on my account that has a leadership and support in this mode. However, she doesn't have silence for that particular ABX season, and there are better options available for this restriction, such as Thena, Scarlet Witch, and even Captain Marvel, which I would recommend building for that instead of converting Rachel's build for this day. Of the characters that I've tested in PvP recently, I would say that Havok is probably the most upsetting and biggest letdown that I've seen. Although the character has almost 40% damage reduction, he has 35, he has super armor, he has an iframe ignore, he also has super guard break on 3 of his main skills, the 3, 4, and 5. The character just performs horribly in PvP. The character basically has 2 main issues with his kit, which essentially just ruins his PvP performance. The first is that the AI prioritizes the 4th skill, which you would think is really good because it is the iframe ignore skill. It has 5 seconds of invincible on it, and it also has penetration. The problem is that the 4th skill, penetration, doesn't include invincible, and considering that that is the most prominent kind of protective effect in PvP now, it basically just doesn't do anything. He'll just stand there and try to attack, but not have any of the damage go through to the health bar. The second issue is that the 4th skill is a very long animation and doesn't have iframe on it until the end when it doesn't really matter. So he's basically just sitting there attacking when the opponent can also target you, and they have the benefit of penetration to invincible, as well as other things like super guard break that can interrupt you and many of the other things. So oftentimes you'll basically just end up dying right away as you try to iframe ignore them. Considering that you're likely not going to be building this character for timeline, but rather for something like Alliance Conquest or maybe even PvE, I would highly recommend going with a CTP of Destruction, since you can get that early burst to potentially take out some big meta characters right away. and because the character, like I said, opens with invincible off the 4th skill, so something like a CTP of authority won't really matter when he'll just end up dying very quickly anyway, and you won't get the benefit of that steal authority. The destruction also gives you the obvious penetration to invincible, which gives you the potential to take out some top metas fairly quickly, where he would otherwise just end up dying. Ironically enough, Rachel performs better than Havok, even though she doesn't have iframe ignore in her kit. She does a lot of the things that Havok does wrong, or that his kit doesn't do, which is provide penetration to all sources, including invincible, so she can go through a lot of the meta characters that either have invincible through their kit or through a CTP, like a steal authority. And on top of that, her AI actually opens with the 5th skill, which is almost a full iframe, so she basically just hides in a long animation that is an iframe, whereas Havok's wasn't an iframe and he just sits there waiting to die. Rachel also gets damage immunity when the AI uses the 5th skill, so even though she is in that iframe, she has added protection from that, and on top of that, she also gains 40% guaranteed dodge from her passive, meaning that she becomes even harder to hit when she is in that iframe and even when she's out of it. Besides this, she also has super armor in her kit natively, so it's a bit harder to lock her down by the opponent if they have super guard break, and because she has 30% damage reduction, you can also stack that up using supports or something like a steal authority to make her even tankier. Not to mention the fact that she also has a self debuff, or a debuff that also applies to Phoenix allies. And on top of this, the AI frequently spams the 5th skill, which also has that heal. Obviously, her PvP value stems from the fact that she has a revive artifact, which coupled with the awakening skill allows her to basically nuke everyone that's on the field when that skill becomes active after she dies. In terms of her build options, I would recommend a steal authority first, because she is already tanky, and because she has 30% damage reduction in her kit already, you can basically stack that up, and because she is tough to already take down, because she is also universal, so she doesn't have a type disadvantage, you can potentially reach that awakening skill with the character if the opponent doesn't get through her defenses. To add to this, the character already does a lot of damage and doesn't necessarily need the damage proc, and doesn't really need the penetration because she has it in her kit already, unlike characters like Cersei who don't have that and need something like a destruction to get that penetration. I would say that a CTP of Conquest could potentially work as well, though probably not as well as a CTP of Authority, since she doesn't use the invincible skill or her 4th skill often. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that she can potentially use her 3rd skill, which has super guard break on it, but again, the AI doesn't use that too often either. If you're finding that her offensive capability is lacking on your particular build, or that you would prefer that she has more of it, you can go with a CTP of Destruction to get that guaranteed damage proc off when she goes into her awakening skill, and I would probably recommend that over a CTP of Greed first, just because of that reason. Though a CTP of Greed could function pretty well for her as well, considering that her survival is pretty decent, though it won't necessarily guarantee that the proc will go off or the type proc will be the same as the one you want when she goes into her awakening skill. To show you that Rachel has the most PvP potential out of the other two, I took her into Alliance Conquest versus level 80 Carnage with an Agent Venom support, and simply by using the awakening skill, she was able to fully take down Carnage. So one thing that's important to note is that if the opponent doesn't have a level 3 or possibly level 4 artifact that's for the immortality, she can just hide in that awakening skill and just wipe out the whole 3 to 4 seconds of that immortality to take them out. In this second test, I'm facing off versus a tier 4 Carnage, and this time I'm using Havok with that CTP of Destruction and the burst to activate Carnage's immortality effect so that Rachel can clean up whatever's left if she ends up going into the awakening skill. But you can see that her survival is actually really good. I didn't even end up going down to half health and was able to take down Carnage even without using the awakening skill. Exodus is obviously on the team just to provide the debuff, but this is just a test. I wouldn't normally combine these characters together since you can split the debuffs of Rachel and Exodus to different teams. So basically, to summarize, Hope is the go-to character for ABX. I tested her a bit in PvP, but she had little to no value there, so it's best just to put a CTP of Rage on her and focus her in the ABX modes. Havok was really not that good in PvP, and I would say that the best option for him is to give him a CTP of Destruction and make him viable for PvP, while also helping with his strengths in World Boss Legend, since he ended up performing so well there. Again, ironically enough, Rachel had the most PvP value with her artifact in things like Alliance Conquest, since again, Havok won't really be used in Timeline. You're going to be using him in Alliance Conquest as well. Compared to Rachel, Rachel does perform better than him. It's nice that in this epic quest you actually have more value than just the native tier 2. Again, you have Hope for ABX modes, you have Havok for World Boss Legend and some PvP modes, and you have Rachel for PvP modes like Alliance Conquest. However, it's oddly difficult to recommend these characters because newer players would have so many benefits from this epic quest if it wasn't so ridiculously expensive, because they have to also get Rachel Summers to be able to access Madeline Pryor. Then it kind of isn't really available for new players, especially considering that you would need an artifact for both Rachel and for Madeline for them to have value in PvP. So basically it leaves the epic quest more so for players that have their account already built up to some extent, since they can benefit off of Hope for ABX if they're trying to push scores there, or they can get some value from Rachel and Madeline in PvP modes like Otherworld Battle and Alliance Conquest. However, none of those characters are really meta outside of the people who are really pushing in things like Alliance Tournament and need Hope for ABX. The devs would basically need to release upgrades for Madeline for her to become meta in PvP, and some uniform or upgrade for Havok for him to become significantly better in PvP, considering how poor he is without a uniform there. What I'm trying to say is that for newer players, it probably makes more sense to go with meta characters in another epic quest, like Jean's epic quest, for example, since this one will be more expensive if you're trying to go for the artifacts and get Rachel Summers on top of the deluxe pack. That does it for this one. The teaser for the next tier 4 was for Mystique, so I'm probably going to check that out considering she is the first speed villain tier 4 character and will likely be meta for that particular restriction of the ABX day. It's also likely that Exodus gets a tier 3, so I'll review him as well if he has really any value outside of just being a sport. And there is also a potential chance that there is another mode introduced, since the teaser kind of hinted at that, so we'll see what that one is. Anyways, if you found this video entertaining or useful, please consider liking, subscribing, and possibly sharing it with others. As always, it can help them out and it definitely helps my channel grow. I always appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.